My name is Maya Lin. For 6 years, I let myself become a ghost in my own marriage, believing that patience could buy devotion. I was wrong. It took giving birth in an empty hospital room to realize that some men measure love only by how much of you they can consume. When I left that building with my baby girl, I didn't just walk out on a husband. I stepped back into a life I should have never abandoned. This is the story of how I dismantled an empire built on my silence, brick by brick. Rain slammed against the tall glass facade of the private airport hangar. Inside the idling luxury sedan, Harrison Walker adjusted his silver cuff links, completely untroubled by the storm outside. 10 days under the tropical sun had restored his tan, but his eyes remained as sharp and cold as polished ice. Beside him, Evelyn Hart tapped her manicured nails on a leather folder, her dark eyes flashing with quiet satisfaction. "The board will approve the expansion by Friday," Evelyn said, her voice smooth and deliberate. "Assuming there are no unexpected domestic disruptions." "There won't be," Harrison replied without looking up from his tablet. "My mother has everything under control at the house." "And Maya?" "Maya does as she is told," Harrison said flatly. Evelyn smiled, leaning back against the hand-stitched leather seat. She didn't press the subject. She knew better than to push when Harrison was in work mode. Outside, the driver stacked heavy luggage into the trunk before opening the rear door for them. Harrison stepped into the damp air, barely glancing at the elder man holding the umbrella. "Welcome back, Mr. Walker," the driver offered quietly. "Straight to the Bellevue office, Arthur," Harrison commanded, sinking into the plush interior. "I have a 2 o'clock meeting with the regional directors." Arthur paused, his hand hovering over the door handle. "Sir, your mother called the main line an hour ago. She asked that you stop by her residence first." Harrison frowned, his thumb pausing over his screen. "Did she say why?" "No, sir, only that it was urgent." An annoying itch of irritation tugged at Harrison's calm demeanor. He hated schedule changes. He hated surprises even more. He tapped the back of the front seat with 2 fingers. "Fine, Bellevue Estate first." 30 minutes later, Harrison stood in the cavernous, marble-floored living room of his mother's estate. Victoria Walker sat near the towering fireplace, holding a porcelain teacup with delicate, aged hands. She looked immaculate, every hair pinned in place, her posture rigid. "You took your time," Victoria noted, setting her cup down with a faint clink. "Traffic was heavy," Harrison said, remaining near the entryway. "What is so important that it couldn't wait until tonight?" Victoria raised her gray eyes to meet his. "Maya left the clinic." Harrison scoffed softly. "Good. The recovery suite was costing $4,000 a night. Did she take the infant to our townhouse?" "She isn't at the townhouse, Harrison," Victoria said, her tone unnervingly flat. "And she didn't leave alone." Silence stretched across the immense room. Harrison took 2 slow steps forward, his brow furrowing. "What are you talking about?" "She checked out 12 days ago," Victoria explained, pulling a heavy paper folder from the side table. "She refused to sign the preliminary custody waivers we sent over. The nursing staff said a private car collected her and the girl." "She has no money," Harrison said, a sudden edge entering his voice. "Her personal accounts are tied to my firm. She has nowhere to go." "Apparently, she found somewhere," Victoria replied, extending the folder toward him. "A messenger dropped this off at my gates an hour ago. It's addressed to you." Harrison snatched the paper from her hands. Inside lay a single, unsealed document bearing a bold red legal stamp, accompanied by a small black flash drive. He scanned the header, his chest tightening as he recognized the seal of a major corporate law firm, one he didn't retain. "What is this?" he muttered. "A formal freeze on your secondary investment assets," Victoria stated, her voice finally betraying a hint of strain. "She didn't just leave you, Harrison. She locked the trust doors on her way out." Harrison stared at the signature at the bottom of the page. It wasn't the tentative, shaky handwriting of the woman he had married. It was clean, sharp, and terrifyingly precise. "My former home felt colder than a vault. I didn't need to step inside the Bellevue townhouse to know that Harrison's polished world was already beginning to fracture. When you spend 6 years paying attention to every shift in the air, you learn to spot the cracks long before the ceiling collapses. Harrison slammed the heavy mahogany front door of the townhouse, the echo rattling the glass sconces in the entryway. Dust motes danced in the pale afternoon light filtering through the linen drapes. He stood in the foyer for a long moment, listening for the soft, ambient sounds that usually filled the house. The low murmur of a jazz track, the quiet hum of an electric kettle, the light rustle of Maya's footsteps upstairs. Nothing, only a dense, suffocating silence. "Maya," he called out, his voice sharp and unyielding. He didn't receive an answer. He stormed up the winding staircase, his leather shoes thudding heavily against the hardwood steps. He threw open the door to the primary bedroom suite. The bed was made, the duvet pulled taut without a single crease. On the vanity, her crystal perfume bottles remained lined up in neat rows, but when he opened the walk-in closet, half the space gaped entirely empty. Her casual clothes, her sturdy boots, and her mother's antique jewelry box were gone. Down the hall, the nursery stood frozen in time. A hand-painted crib sat near the bay window, draped in a cream-colored blanket. Harrison stepped inside, his chest tightening unexpectedly. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and lavender laundry detergent, but the bassinet sat empty. The silver rattle his mother had purchased lay untouched on a changing table. His phone vibrated violently in his pocket. He yanked it out, seeing Arthur's name on the screen. "What is it, Arthur?" Harrison snapped, stepping back into the hallway. "Mr. Walker, the legal team from the Montgomery Group just delivered a formal notice to our Midtown office," Arthur reported, his tone tense and hurried. "They filed an injunction regarding the secondary liquidity accounts linked to Walker Holdings." Harrison's knuckles turned white around the phone. "Montgomery Group, that's a hedge fund. What do they have to do with my wife?" "Their senior managing partner is William Montgomery, sir," Arthur said, taking a cautious breath. "According to the court filing, Maya Lynn is his daughter." Harrison froze mid-step near the top of the stairs. The name hit him like a physical blow. William Montgomery was a legend in institutional finance, a reclusive, iron-willed billionaire who had built a quiet financial fortress over 4 decades. "She cut ties with him 8 years ago," Harrison muttered, more to himself than to Arthur. "She didn't take a dime from him." "It appears she reconnected with him, sir," Arthur replied quietly. "The filing bears his lead counsel's signature." Harrison disconnected the call without another word. Panic, cold and sharp, trickled into his bloodstream. Maya had always been the quiet, accommodating anchor in his life. She had proofread his pitch decks when Walker Holdings was just 3 engineers in a rented basement. She had smiled through endless, mind-numbing charity dinners. She had never demanded equity, never asked about the corporate tax structures, and never questioned why his name sat on every title. Or so he had thought. He raced down the stairs and headed straight for his private study at the back of the house. He unlocked the heavy steel safe behind the bookshelf, pulled out the leather-bound ledger containing the firm's original asset divisions, and threw it onto the desk. He flipped rapidly through the yellowed pages until he found the signature pages from 4 years prior, the paperwork Maya had signed during their first major refinancing round. His eyes scanned the fine print. Beside her signature sat a small, handwritten notation in dark blue ink, a tiny series of numbers and a personal codicil he had dismissed as a clerical error years ago. It wasn't an error. It was an escrow reservation clause. Maya hadn't just signed the corporate papers. She had embedded a contingent trust claim tied directly to her birth name. The moment he attempted to remove her from the entity without her explicit consent, the clause automatically triggered a full audit of all connected subsidiary funds. Harrison slammed his fist onto the desk, rattling the bronze lamp. "She knew," he whispered, his breathing heavy in the quiet room. "She knew 4 years ago." His phone chimed again. A text message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. No greeting, no dramatic threats, just a single PDF attachment labeled Walker Holdings Audit Summary, PDF, and a short line of text underneath. You looked at the wrong numbers, Harrison. See you in court. My father's library in Seattle smelled of cedar, old paper, and dark roast coffee, a comforting scent that had remained unchanged since my childhood. Returning to that room with Noah in my arms was like stepping out of a dark tunnel. 8 years earlier, I had walked away from my father's fortune because I wanted to prove I could make my own way. I had chosen Harrison over my family's legacy. Now, sitting in a leather wingback chair while my brother Daniel handed me a warm mug, I finally saw the truth. My pride had nearly cost me everything. The forensic team reviewed the PDF you sent Harrison, Daniel said, leaning against the massive mahogany desk. He picked up a thick white binder and laid it across my lap. You hit him right where it hurts most. I looked down at the documents, feeling a quiet resolve replace the hollow exhaustion in my chest. He thought I was just filing laundry receipts while he built Walker Holdings. He never realized I was reading every quarterly ledger he brought home. And he certainly didn't realize you kept the original escrow reservation intact, my father added, walking slowly into the room. William Montgomery looked silver-haired and stoic, but his eyes softened as he glanced at the bassinet sleeping beside my chair. He paused, resting a heavy hand on my shoulder. You played a quiet, long game, Maya. I didn't start it as a game, Dad, I whispered, meeting his gaze. I signed those papers 4 years ago because I wanted our future secured. I only added that clause as safety insurance. I hoped I'd never have to use it. Well, it's working, Daniel said, opening his laptop. Harrison's emergency board meeting starts in 20 minutes. His chief financial officer, Marcus Walker, his uncle, is already panicking. They can't close their $50 million green energy round while our injunction is active. Across town, the executive conference room on the top floor of Walker Holdings was suffocatingly hot. Sweat glistened on Marcus Walker's forehead as he slammed a stack of printouts onto the center glass table. Are you out of your mind, Harrison? Marcus shouted, his voice cracking. The auditors from the state pension fund are calling every 10 minutes. If they find out our liquidity reserves are tied up in a family trust freeze, they'll pull out before lunch. Harrison sat at the head of the table, his arms folded tight across his chest. His posture was rigid, but his jaw twitched continuously. The trust freeze is temporary. My lawyers are filing a countermotion right now. A countermotion against William Montgomery's legal team. Evelyn Hart interjected from the far side of the table, her tone sharp and devoid of its usual warmth. She tapped her tablet screen aggressively. Harrison, Montgomery's team has 6 senior partners on this. Our legal counsel warned us an hour ago that a judge won't overturn a contingent trust claim without a full evidentiary hearing. That could take months. Then we buy them out, Harrison growled, leaning forward. We offer Maya a lump sum settlement, $10 million, cash. Marcus let out a bitter, mocking laugh. $10 million? Harrison, her father's firm manages $4 billion. She doesn't want your cash. She's freezing us because she knows where the bodies are buried. The room went dead silent. Evelyn stared at Marcus, her dark eyes narrowing. What bodies, Marcus? Harrison shot his uncle a lethal look. Shut up, Marcus. No, I won't shut up, Marcus snapped, his hands trembling as he gestured toward the screen displaying the company's asset flow. Maya handled the initial corporate structuring when we launched 6 years ago. She knows about the secondary offshore licensing shell in Grand Cayman. She knows who signed off on those transfers. Evelyn slowly turned her gaze toward Harrison. The polished affection she usually displayed vanished completely, replaced by cold corporate calculation. Harrison, you told me the Cayman licensing entity was fully vetted by outside counsel. It was, Harrison said smoothly, though a bead of sweat trickled down his neck. Marcus is panicking over routine tax planning. Routine tax planning doesn't cause a billionaire's legal team to launch a full-scale freeze, Evelyn said, standing up and smoothing her pencil skirt. She gathered her leather portfolio. I'm calling my personal attorney. Until this audit resolves, I am stepping back from public press appearances for Walker Holdings. Evelyn, sit down, Harrison ordered, his voice echoing in the large room. She didn't stop. She reached the door, paused, and looked back at him with a cool, detached expression. I joined this firm to run global strategy, Harrison. I didn't join to be the public face of an asset laundering investigation. Fix it. The heavy door clicked shut behind her. Harrison stared at the blank screen at the end of the table, the walls of his carefully constructed world pressing inward. My father always said that when a man builds his life on a false foundation, you don't need to knock it down. You just have to pull on the single loose thread he tried to hide. Sitting in my old bedroom at the Bellevue estate, listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of my daughter in her crib, I felt a quiet calm settle over me. I wasn't the grieving, exhausted woman who had checked out of the clinic weeks ago. I was focused, sharp, and entirely in control. My phone chimed on the nightstand. I picked it up and saw an encrypted message from Daniel. Board emergency session ended 5 minutes ago. Evelyn Hart just walked out. Marcus is spiraling. I smiled softly into the dim room. Evelyn was an opportunist. The second she smelled corporate fire, she jumped to save her own skin. Across the city, inside the executive suite of Walker Holdings, Harrison poured himself 3 fingers of aged scotch. The amber liquid shook slightly in the crystal glass. He downed it in a single gulp, the alcohol burning its way down his throat, doing nothing to dull the sharp edge of panic creeping into his mind. A heavy knock rattled his office door. Arthur stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his face pale in the harsh LED lights. "What now, Arthur?" Harrison snapped, setting the glass down with a heavy thud. "Sir, 2 federal investigators from the Securities Division are downstairs in the lobby," Arthur said quietly. "They have a formal request for our international licensing logs from the past 3 fiscal years." Harrison's glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. Scotch splashed across his leather shoes, but he didn't even flinch. "They can't demand those without a signed warrant," Harrison said, his voice dropping into a desperate whisper. "They have a court order signed an hour ago," Arthur replied, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Sir," the filing listed a specific informant name attached to the preliminary evidence. Harrison stepped over the broken glass, taking 2 quick strides toward his assistant. "Who?" "Your uncle, Marcus Walker." Harrison felt as if the air had been sucked completely out of the room. "Marcus." "He met with Mrs. Walker's legal counsel yesterday afternoon," Arthur explained, his tone completely flat. "He turned over the secondary authorization logs in exchange for immunity regarding the Cayman account transfers." A harsh laugh escaped Harrison's throat. His own blood, the man who had convinced him to open those offshore shells in the first place, had traded him for a clean exit. Every deal he had closed, every lie he had told, and every night he had spent neglecting his home had brought him to this single, pathetic moment. He grabbed his suit jacket off the chair and shoved his arms through the sleeves. "Get my car." "Where are you going, Mr. Walker?" "To see my wife." 20 minutes later, Harrison's sports car screeched to a halt outside the massive wrought iron gates of the Montgomery estate. He threw open his door, marched up to the security intercom, and shoved the button with his thumb. "Maya," he roared into the metal speaker. "Maya, open this damn gate." A tall guard stepped out of the stone gatehouse, his hands resting casually on his tactical belt. "Sir, you need to return to your vehicle and leave the property." "I am her husband," Harrison yelled, his hair disheveled from the wind, his eyes wild. "I have a right to talk to my wife." The heavy iron gates didn't budge. Instead, a sleek black sedan pulled up behind Harrison's car. The rear window rolled down, revealing my father, William Montgomery. He looked at Harrison with a mixture of cold disappointment and absolute indifference. "You're making a scene on private property, Harrison," my father said, his voice quiet yet carrying through the chilly night air. Harrison turned, rushing toward the sedan. "Tell her to pull the audit. She's destroying everything I spent 10 years building." My father didn't flinch. He adjusted his silk tie and met Harrison's panicked gaze with unwavering steel. "You destroyed it yourself the day you decided your family was disposable," my father said softly. "My daughter didn't break your company, Harrison. She simply stopped protecting you from your own choices. The window rolled back up, and the sedan glided smoothly past Harrison as the gates slowly opened to let it inside. Harrison stood alone in the dark, watching the iron bars swing shut, locking him out of the world he had so arrogantly cast aside. My father's words hung in the crisp evening air long after the heavy iron gates clicked shut, locking Harrison outside. From the second-floor library window, I watched his low-slung sports car pull a desperate U-turn, its tires screeching against the wet pavement as he sped off into the dark. He looked smaller through the glass, no longer the untouchable titan of Vance Holdings, but a panicked man watching his glass house crack under the weight of his own greed. In the downtown high-rise offices of what was once Walker Holdings, light burned bright through the floor-to-ceiling windows long past midnight. Harrison threw open his private suite door, his suit jacket soaked with cold drizzle. He kicked a fallen chair out of his path and marched straight to his desk, sweeping a brass lamp and a stack of financial journals onto the floor with a deafening crash. "Call the firm's crisis publicists," Harrison shouted into his intercom, his chest heaving. "Now, Arthur." Arthur stepped into the doorway, holding a plain tablet. His usual deferential posture had disappeared, replaced by a tense, rigid stillness. "The public relations team terminated our contract 20 minutes ago, Mr. Walker. They cited a conflict of interest with the ongoing federal inquiry." Harrison stared at him, his mouth open, a beat of disbelieving silence stretching between them. "They did what?" "They dropped us," Arthur said, his voice flat. "And 2 more board members resigned electronically 5 minutes ago. They released a statement to the Business Wire distancing themselves from all offshore licensing decisions." Harrison dropped into his leather executive chair, burying his face in his hands. The silence inside the massive office felt heavy, suffocating. 6 years of 100-hour work weeks, missed anniversaries, ignored phone calls, and cold calculation, all crumbling within 48 hours. His phone buzzed on the mahogany desk. He looked up, expecting another frantic call from a lawyer or a lender. The screen displayed his mother's name, Victoria Walker. He grabbed the device and brought it to his ear. "Mother, tell me you haven't spoken to the press." "Harrison," Victoria's voice came through thin and trembling, completely stripped of its usual aristocratic composure. "Federal marshals just served a freeze order on my personal estate accounts. They say my name appears on 3 shell companies connected to your uncle's licensing structure." Harrison sat bolt upright. "What? That's impossible. Uncle Marcus handled those filings." "Marcus signed them using my power of attorney," Victoria gasped, her voice breaking. "He told me it was standard asset management. Harrison, what did you let happen?" A cold realization settled deep in Harrison's stomach. He had spent years delegating, and delegating, pushing uncomfortable details onto his uncle, hiding behind legal jargon, and looking the other way as long as the revenue numbers went up. He had believed he was playing chess, but he had been the piece being moved all along. "I'll call our chief legal officer," Harrison muttered, though the words sounded hollow even to him. "Your chief legal officer just resigned, Harrison," Victoria whispered. "The ship is sinking. Fix this." The line went dead. Harrison slowly lowered the phone, staring at his reflection in the dark glass of the window. For the first time in his life, no clever pitch deck, no smooth smile, and no threat could save him. Across the city, in my father's study, Daniel set down a fresh stack of legal printouts beside my mug of hot tea. "Harrison's board just called an emergency vote for tomorrow morning," Daniel said quietly, a faint, satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "They're voting to remove him as chief executive." I leaned back in the plush chair, looking over at Noah sleeping peacefully in her bassinet. "It didn't have to end this way for him," I said softly, feeling neither triumph nor bitterness, only a deep, quiet freedom. He had everything. He just couldn't stop reaching for more. My father always taught me that the hardest part of walking away isn't the physical leaving. It's resisting the urge to look back when the dust starts to settle. As morning broke over Seattle, a cool breeze washed over the Bellevue estate balcony. Downstairs, Daniel was already sipping espresso and reviewing the financial wire releases. The headlines were relentless. The financial press had caught scent of the blood in the water, and the fall of Walker Holdings was moving faster than even my father had anticipated. At 9 o'clock sharp, Harrison stood outside the heavy glass doors of the grand boardroom at Walker Holdings. His hair was meticulously slicked back, and his double-breasted suit was pressed, but dark circles shadowed his bloodshot eyes. He adjusted his silk tie with a trembling hand, took a slow breath, and pushed the door open. The long mahogany table was surrounded by the remaining 8 board members. No smiles greeted him. No one offered coffee. Sitting at the far end was Arthur, holding a tablet, accompanied by 2 independent auditors from a national accounting firm. "Harrison," Board Chairman Richard Sterling said, his tone dry and clinical. "Take a seat." "I prefer to stand," Harrison said, locking his jaw as he strode toward the head of the table. "I understand there's concern regarding the offshore licensing audit. I'm here to assure you that my legal team is resolving the temporary hold on our liquidity reserve." "There is no legal team, Harrison," Sterling interrupted, placing a sleek black binder on the table. "And the liquidity reserve isn't temporarily held. It's completely frozen under federal asset protection laws." Harrison felt a cold drop of sweat trickle down his spine. "That's a temporary filing initiated by my wife's family. A simple settlement." "Your wife's family didn't file the federal fraud notice," Sterling said sharply, leaning forward. "Your Uncle Marcus turned over 6 years of hidden ledgers to the Securities Commission late last night. He admitted to creating shell firms under your mother's power of attorney, firms that billed Walker Holdings for tens of millions in phantom consulting fees." Harrison turned his frantic gaze toward Arthur. "Arthur, tell them this is a misunderstanding. You managed those document packages." Arthur lowered his head, avoiding Harrison's eyes entirely. "I filed what Mr. Marcus Walker gave me, sir, under your direct instruction to expedite all internal paperwork." "You backstabbing!" Harrison took a step toward Arthur, but 2 private security guards stepped into the room, their hands resting neatly at their sides. Sterling stood up, his gaze unyielding. "The board has conducted a formal vote. Effective immediately, you are removed from your position as Chief Executive Officer of Walker Holdings. Your voting shares are suspended pending the outcome of the federal investigation." Harrison stood frozen in the center of the vast, luxurious room. The very empire he had prioritized over his marriage, over his newborn daughter, and over his own integrity was being stripped away in less than 5 minutes. "You can't do this," Harrison whispered, his voice cracking. "I built this company from nothing." "You built it on a hollow foundation, Harrison," Sterling replied, picking up his leather briefcase. "Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings. You have 20 minutes. 10 minutes later, Harrison stood alone in his sprawling executive suite, staring at the empty desk. The framed magazine cover featuring his face had been taken down. His silver pen set lay packed in a small cardboard box. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone, his fingers hovering over my contact number. He pressed call. Across town, in the quiet warmth of my father's sunroom, my phone buzzed on the glass coffee table. I picked it up, saw his name flashing on the screen, and quietly let it go straight to voicemail. Beside me, my father set down his morning newspaper. "He's calling." "Yes," I said softly, setting the phone face down. "Do you want to answer?" I looked down at baby Noah sleeping peacefully in my arms, her small fingers curling around my thumb. "No," I said, a quiet, immovable peace washing over me. "He had 6 years to talk to me. I have nothing left to say." The rain finally stopped over Puget Sound, leaving behind a scrubbed sky and a cool, salt-tinged breeze. 2 weeks after Harrison's public removal from Walker Holdings, the media storm had moved on to newer scandals. The corporate world had a notoriously short memory, but inside the Bellevue estate, every quiet hour felt like a slow, deliberate restoration of the person I used to be. I spent my mornings in the sunroom, working alongside Daniel and a small team of independent accountants. We weren't dismantling Walker Holdings out of spite. We were separating my original intellectual property and contingent trust assets from the wreckage. Daniel leaned over the tablet, scrolling through a fresh financial report. The interim board agreed to surrender the licensing rights to your early green tech patents without a fight. Their legal team knows they don't have a leg to stand on. I adjusted Noah's blanket as she stirred softly in my arms. And Harrison. He sold his sports car last week, Daniel said quietly, not looking up from his screen. He's living in a rented condo near downtown. The federal regulators haven't filed criminal charges against him directly, but his uncle Marcus is facing severe penalties. Harrison's personal assets are mostly tied up in legal fees. A strange wave of quiet stillness settled over me. There was a time when hearing that might have caused a sharp ache in my chest, or perhaps a bitter flash of satisfaction. Now, it felt like reading about a stranger in a newspaper. My phone rang on the glass table. The display showed an unlisted number from a local law office. I pressed speakerphone. Mrs. Lynn Walker, a precise female voice asked. Just Maya Lynn, please, I corrected gently. Of course, Ms. Lynn. I'm calling on behalf of Harrison Walker. He has requested a brief meeting regarding the final dissolution papers. He's agreed to all your child custody and financial terms without objection, but he asked if you would meet him in person to sign. Daniel raised an eyebrow at me, shaking his head slightly. Where? I asked. A private room at the county clerk's office tomorrow morning at 10. I looked down at Noah, who had just opened her deep, dark eyes, looking up at me with complete trust. Tell him I'll be there. The next morning, the small conference room at the county courthouse was stark and white. The harsh overhead fluorescent light reminded me instantly of the postpartum suite where I had spent those lonely nights after delivery. Harrison sat at the long laminate table, wearing a dark blue suit that hung slightly loose on his shoulders. He looked thinner, his jawline sharp, his dark hair no longer styled with that immaculate precision. When the door opened and I walked in wearing a simple navy dress, carrying a leather folder, he stood up immediately. He didn't speak right away. His eyes fixed on me, searching my face with an intense, bewildered scrutiny, as if trying to find the quiet, agreeable woman who used to wait up for him until midnight. Maya, he said softly. His voice sounded surprisingly raspy. Harrison, I replied, taking a seat across from him. I laid the blue folder on the table between us. The paperwork is ready. He didn't touch the folder. He leaned his hands on the table, looking at me with a strange, hollow desperation. You really built an airtight case, didn't you? Daniel's team didn't miss a single detail. I built it myself, Harrison, I said calmly. Daniel just helped me file it. He let out a short, self-deprecating laugh. I spent 6 years thinking I was the brain of that company. I thought I was protecting you by keeping you out of the business. You weren't protecting me, I answered, keeping my voice steady and active. You were hiding from me. You wanted a trophy at home and a quiet partner who wouldn't ask where the money came from. He closed his eyes for a second, swallowing hard. I spoke to my mother yesterday. She's moving to Arizona. Her accounts were cleared out to pay off the settlement with the auditors. I know, I said. Daniel told me. Harrison pulled the folder toward himself, opened the first page, and picked up a pen. His hand hesitated over the signature line. Is Noah doing well? She's healthy, I said, my tone remaining polite but firm. She smiles now. A faint, painful shadow crossed his face. He realized, in that silent moment, that he had missed her first smiles, her first weeks, and the only chance he had ever had to build a family with me. He pressed the pen to the paper and signed his name in 3 quick, sweeping strokes. I lost everything, Maya, he whispered, sliding the papers back across the polished table. I took the folder, closed it, and stood up. You lost what you built on lies, Harrison. What you do with what's left is entirely up to you. The signed divorce papers sat in my leather folder like a closed chapter. Walking out of the county courthouse into the pale morning light, I didn't feel a surge of wild triumph. I felt an immense, quiet weight lifting off my shoulders. I drove straight from the courthouse to a quiet park near the waterfront. My father was sitting on a wooden bench under a towering cedar tree, gently pushing Noah's stroller back and forth. The bay stretched out before them, gray and calm, dotted with distant cargo ships heading out to sea. I walked up quietly, slipping my hands into my coat pockets. "It's done." My father stopped the stroller and looked up at me. He didn't ask about Harrison. He didn't ask about the financial settlement. He simply reached out, took my hand, and squeezed it tightly. "How do you feel, Ellie?" he asked softly, using the childhood nickname I hadn't heard in nearly a decade. "I feel like I can finally breathe," I said, sitting beside him on the bench. For 6 years, I felt like I was running a marathon on a treadmill, working endlessly, supporting Harrison, keeping up appearances, yet never actually moving forward. "That's the trap of living for someone else's approval," my father replied, looking out over the water. "You trade your own purpose for their convenience. I watched you do it, Ellie, and the hardest part of my life was sitting back and letting you realize it on your own." "I was too proud to admit you were right about him," I admitted quietly, tears stinging the corners of my eyes. 8 years ago, when I walked out of your house, I swore I'd never come back asking for help." "You didn't ask for a handout," my father corrected, his voice firm and steady. "You came back to protect your child and take back what was yours. There's no shame in that, Maya, none at all." Across the city, inside a cramped, sunless coffee shop 3 blocks from his new apartment, Harrison sat alone at a corner table. A tepid cup of black coffee sat untouched in front of him. His tablet lay open on the small table. A news notification flashed across the screen. Vance Walker Holdings restructuring approved. Interim CEO announces complete pivot to domestic clean tech. His name wasn't mentioned anywhere in the article. The firm he had bled for, the brand he had crafted, the legacy he had envisioned, it was moving forward without him, smoothly and efficiently. The door to the coffee shop chimed, and Evelyn Hart walked in. She wore a sharp trench coat and sunglasses, scanning the small room until her eyes landed on Harrison. She walked over and sat across from him without waiting for an invitation. Harrison looked up surprised. "Evelyn." "I heard the final papers were signed today," she said, her voice quiet and composed. "They were," Harrison said, leaning back in his chair. "Did you come to offer condolences, or just to check if I'm officially broke?" Evelyn didn't flinch. She removed her sunglasses, laying them neatly on the table. "I came to say goodbye, Harrison. I accepted a senior director position at a firm in San Francisco. I leave on Monday." Harrison let out a dry, bitter laugh. "San Francisco, of course. Everyone is moving on." "You should too," Evelyn said, looking at him with a strange blend of pity and cold realism. "You spent so much time trying to be the smartest man in every room that you never noticed when the room changed. Your wife wasn't an obstacle, Harrison. She was the only person in your life who wasn't using you for a position." Harrison stared at her, the harsh truth of her words cutting deeper than any court ruling or board vote ever could. "Goodbye, Harrison," Evelyn said softly. She stood up, put her sunglasses back on, and walked out into the Seattle drizzle, leaving him entirely alone with his cold coffee and his empty tablet. Autumn painted the hills of Bellevue in fiery shades of amber and gold. The crisp morning air carried the faint scent of wood smoke, bringing a fresh, clean energy to the city. I spent my mornings on the stone terrace of my father's estate, working alongside Daniel to launch a new green tech investment group, one built on full transparency, clean audits, and zero tolerance for corporate shortcuts. Daniel set down a steaming mug of tea beside my laptop. "We secured our first institutional investor this morning, $20 million in initial funding." I smiled, taking a slow sip. No offshore shells, no hidden licensing clauses. "Clean as a whistle," Daniel replied, pulling up the draft press release on his tablet. "We're officially launching Lynn Montgomery Capital next month." I looked over at Noah, who was sitting on a soft blanket near my chair, enthusiastically banging a wooden rattle against a plush bear. The sound was messy, loud, and full of life, a sharp contrast to the cold, structured silence that used to govern my daily routine. My phone chimed on the table. It was an email notification from my former home's property manager. The Bellevue townhouse had officially gone up for sale to cover Harrison's outstanding personal legal debts. Attached to the email were photographs of the staged interior. I scrolled through the images. The sunlit living room where I had spent hundreds of quiet evenings waiting for Harrison's car to pull into the driveway looked empty, stripped of its warmth. Seeing those rooms through a real estate brochure didn't hurt. It felt like looking at a museum exhibit of a past life I barely recognized. Across town, Harrison stood in the center of that very living room. The staged furniture looked impersonal, cold, and cheap. He wore an old pair of jeans and a faded sweater, his hands shoved deep into his pockets as he listened to his real estate agent's high-pitched voice echo off the hardwood floors. "We should get a solid price," the agent insisted, tapping her tablet screen. "The neighborhood is highly desirable, and buyers love the modern finishes." "Just take the first reasonable offer," Harrison said, his voice quiet and flat. "I need the escrow cleared by the end of the month." The agent hesitated, eyeing him with a mixture of professional politeness and quiet pity. "Of course, Mr. Walker. I'll handle everything." When she left, Harrison walked up the stairs to the empty master bedroom. He stood in the doorway, staring at the spot where Maya's vanity had once sat. He remembered how she used to sit there in the quiet mornings, her long dark hair falling over her shoulders as she brushed it, always offering him a gentle, encouraging smile before he rushed off to catch his flight or head to a board meeting. He had thought she would always be there. He had genuinely believed that success, money, and power were the only things that kept a home together. He walked down the hallway to the nursery. The crib was gone, but the pale pink wall paint remained. On the windowsill, he noticed a small, forgotten object left behind the linen drapes, a wooden baby block painted with the letter N. Harrison picked it up, feeling its light weight in his palm. The smooth wood felt colder than he expected. He sat down on the hardwood floor, resting his back against the bare wall, holding that tiny block in his hand as the late afternoon shadows lengthened across the empty room. Winter brought a quiet, pristine stillness to the Pacific Northwest, turning the mountains around Seattle into jagged peaks of ice and pine. 4 months after the dissolution of Walker Holdings, the city had settled into a new rhythm, and so had I. Inside the newly renovated offices of Lynn Montgomery Capital, sunlight streamed through tall glass windows, illuminating exposed brick walls and long oak tables. I stood near the floor-to-ceiling glass, reviewing an investment proposal for an offshore wind turbine project. The firm was thriving, but more importantly, it operated with absolute clarity. Every contract was transparent. Every partner had a voice. Daniel walked into my office, holding 2 paper cups of dark roast coffee. He set one on my desk and leaned against the frame. "We just finalized the term sheet for the Puget Sound Clean Energy startup," Daniel said, his face glowing with quiet pride. Their founders were practically in tears. They said the previous venture firm tried to lock them into an aggressive licensing trap. I smiled, taking a sip of the warm coffee. "Who was the previous firm?" "A subsidiary of Walker Holdings," Daniel replied softly. "Or what's left of it." I looked out at the bustling city streets below. "How is the restructuring holding up?" "The new management team rebranded entirely last week," Daniel said, pulling up a news article on his phone. "They dropped the Walker name completely. They're called Apex Grid now. The board settled the outstanding regulator fines, but Harrison's name was officially scrubbed from the corporate history page." A quiet sigh escaped my lips. "And Harrison?" "He moved out of the Bellevue townhouse last Tuesday," Daniel said. "The bank processed the short sale. He's working as an independent financial consultant for a mid-tier logistics firm in Tacoma. No press, no executive suites, no private jets." Across town, inside a drafty, third-floor walk-up office in Tacoma, Harrison sat behind a scuffed laminate desk. Rain tapped steadily against the single narrow window. A stack of paper tax ledgers lay open before him, accompanied by a cold mug of cheap office coffee. His phone rang, a cheap prepaid model that had replaced his sleek corporate device. He answered without looking at the caller ID. "Harrison Walker," he said, his voice flat and practical. "Harrison, it's Marcus." A raspy voice came through the speaker. Harrison paused, his fingers tightening around his pen. His uncle was calling from a federal holding facility in Oregon, waiting for his formal sentencing hearing. "Why are you calling me, Marcus?" Harrison asked quietly. "I need you to hire a legal representative for my appeal hearing next month," Marcus pleaded, his tone thin and desperate. "The state prosecutors are trying to make an example of me. You know I didn't act alone, Harrison. You signed those authorization packages." Harrison looked at the bare walls of his tiny office, then down at the worn edges of his sleeves. For 6 years, he would have panicked, called high-priced corporate defense attorneys, lied, deflected, and scrambled to protect the family name. Now, he felt only a hollow, heavy clarity. "You made your choices, Marcus," Harrison said, his voice steady and quiet. "And I made mine by ignoring what you were doing. I'm not paying for another lawyer, and I'm not covering for you anymore." "Harrison, wait." Harrison clicked the end button, set the phone face down on the desk, and picked up his red auditing pen. He returned to his work, accepting the cold reality of his new life without making excuses. Spring arrived with a sudden, warm brightness, turning the Seattle waterfront into a vibrant canvas of green grass and blooming cherry blossoms. 6 months after the launch of Lynn Montgomery Capital, the firm had secured its place as a trusted name in sustainable infrastructure. My days were full, demanding, and satisfying, but my evenings belonged entirely to my home and my daughter. On a crisp Tuesday afternoon, I pushed Noah's stroller along the paved paths of Green Lake Park. The sun reflected off the sparkling water, casting long, golden shadows across the park benches. Noah was sitting up straight, wearing a little yellow jacket, her small hands pointing enthusiastically at a flock of ducks near the shore. Her bright giggles filled the air, warm and clear. I stopped near a wooden bench, taking a quiet breath of the ocean breeze. As I reached into the stroller pocket for her water bottle, a tall figure stepped onto the path a few yards away. He wore a plain canvas jacket, dark jeans, and scuffed leather boots. His hair was cut short, free of hair products, and his hands were tucked deep into his coat pockets. It was Harrison. He froze when he saw me, his eyes widening in sudden surprise. He looked healthier than he had at the courthouse. His skin had regained some color, though fine lines now framed his eyes, and the arrogant tilt of his chin was completely gone. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The park bustled around us, joggers passing by, dogs barking in the distance, children laughing near the playground. Harrison took 2 slow steps forward, keeping a respectful distance. He didn't rush. He didn't demand anything. He simply looked at me, then slowly lowered his eyes to the stroller. "Maya," he said softly, his voice carrying a quiet, rasping gentleness I had never heard during our marriage. "Harrison," I replied, my tone remaining composed, grounded, and calm. He looked down at Noah, who was staring up at him with curious, dark eyes, the same dark eyes that ran in my family. His chest rose and fell in a heavy, silent breath. "She looks like you," Harrison whispered, a small, sad smile touching the corner of his mouth. "She has your calm." "She's a happy baby," I said softly. Harrison nodded slowly. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn object. It was the painted wooden baby block with the letter N that he had found in the empty Bellevue nursery months ago. He held it out on his flat palm, not stepping closer, just offering it. "I found this when I moved out of the townhouse," Harrison said, his voice trembling slightly. "I kept it on my desk in Tacoma. I wanted to give it back to you, for her." I looked at the wooden block, then met his eyes. There was no anger left between us, only the quiet, heavy reality of the paths we had chosen. I took 2 steps forward, picked the block up off his palm, and placed it safely in the stroller basket. "Thank you, Harrison," I said softly. He swallowed hard, looking at me with a profound, unvarnished honesty. I'm working as an auditor for a small logistics firm now. It's quiet. The hours are long, but I handle my own paperwork. A faint, self-deprecating laugh escaped his lips. No shortcuts. That sounds like a good place to start, I answered, keeping my voice gentle. I know I destroyed what we had, Maya, Harrison said, his eyes searching mine with complete sincerity. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I finally understand why you left. I left so my daughter would never grow up thinking love means living in someone else's shadow, I said quietly, meeting his gaze without flinching. I hope you build a life you can be proud of, Harrison. Harrison nodded, taking a slow step back onto the gravel path. I hope so, too. He looked at Noah one last time, offering a small, silent wave before turning around and walking slowly down the path toward the park exit, merging into the afternoon crowd until he disappeared entirely. I watched him go, feeling no regret, no bitterness, and no pain. I turned the stroller around, looked at my daughter, and smiled as the afternoon sun warmed our shoulders. Looking back across the years, I realized that stepping away from the life I knew was never about seeking revenge. It was about survival. True strength doesn't manifest in loud victories or ruined rivals. It emerges in the quiet, undeniable courage to walk away from a broken promise and build something real on your own terms. 5 years after that afternoon at Green Lake Park, the Puget Sound coastline sparkled under a warm summer sun. A gentle sea breeze swept across the open terrace of our new headquarters in downtown Seattle. Inside the glass-walled conference room, members of our investment committee gathered around a large wooden table to review our annual sustainability report. Daniel stood at the head of the table, tapping his tablet screen to bring up a series of financial charts. Our renewable energy portfolio expanded by 40% this fiscal year. Every partner entity passed its third-party audit with flying colors. My father sat near the window, holding a cup of black coffee, a proud smile warming his eyes as he looked over at me. You built an incredible firm, Maya. We built it together, Dad, I replied softly, setting my coffee cup down. My phone chimed with a calendar reminder. Noah's soccer practice at 4. I smiled, closing my laptop. My life was no longer governed by 100-hour work weeks or cold corporate posturing. My time belonged to my work, my family, and my own peace of mind. I picked up my jacket, walked down the oak-paneled hallway, and stepped out onto the sunlit terrace. Below, the city buzzed with energy, ferries gliding across the blue waters of the bay, cars moving along the coastal highway, people walking through the waterfront parks. Harrison had moved away from Washington 2 years ago to take a permanent teaching position at a small community college in Oregon. He sent a brief, polite letter every holiday season, never asking for money or favors, simply wishing us well. He had chosen a quieter path, far away from boardrooms and high-stakes games. I leaned against the smooth stone railing of the terrace, watching a ferry cut across the sparkling water. 6 years ago, I thought my life was over when I sat alone in that cold hospital room with a baby in my arms. I had believed that losing my marriage meant losing my future. Now, holding a fresh cup of tea, listening to the quiet hum of a firm bearing my family's name, I knew the truth. Losing that marriage wasn't an ending. It was the moment my real life finally began. What would you do? If you were in Maya's shoes, would you have given Harrison a second chance when he reached out at the park, or would you have walked away for good just like she did? How would you handle rebuilding your life after discovering someone you trusted was keeping huge secrets from you? Write a comment below. I want to know what you think about the story, and I read every single comment. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really means the world to me.